When I decided to allow politics into the podcast realm of the show that we produce, I was unsure of what the outcome would be, unsure of what the reception would be. But what I did know is that it would raise eyebrows and attention because politics is an emotional issue for many people. Understandably, it's emotional. So, from part one, when the focus was on the re election of the current president, I got some feedback and I had a couple of people ask me if they could provide a response to certain points that were made in part one, which was more conservative and focused on re election. So, in this response, I have Todd Cooley, who is a lawyer and a university professor, who wanted to touch on some specific points to kind of maybe bridge the gap for some holes that he saw in the arguments, discussions, and perspectives that were offered in part one. This discussion was given specifically to find a common ground so we can actually move forward and progress as a nation in a political discourse that gives us the best option for society as a whole. So, after you listen to this episode, if you want to reply, contact me and let me know, and then we can continue, because I think that the discussion that we've had has been a very fruitful and productive one that moves us towards a common goal: how to get the best for the society we live in and for the citizens that live in our country. So, without further ado, let's go. And today on Voices, I'm super excited because as much as I've avoided the political conversations and debates, this is the year for it. 2020 is supposed to give us some clear vision. And so we had part one, where we had a bid for re-election and the argument for it. We had part two, where we were looking to find a new course direction. And part one resonated with enough people where part three is here, and it's the response to re-election. Joining me today is Todd, and no person can give a better introduction for themselves than themselves. So Todd, thank you for being here, and I will leave the floor to you.
Hey Lou, how are you, buddy? Thanks for having me. My name is Todd, and I'm a lawyer and university professor. Been practicing law for about 16 years, as well as teaching a variety of different law classes: business law, business and entrepreneurship, business ethics and small business, philosophy and ethics. And currently, I'm living here in Colombia, and I'm teaching at a university here. English, as well as some of the topics that I just mentioned. So thanks again for having me.
I thank you. To me, it's super duper exciting because I've had a feeling that there would be a pretty good response once I decided to do a podcast about politics. I've always loved politics. I've always seen it as the art of negotiation, and it disappoints me sometimes because I did teach civics, economics, and the like in the United States, and it was always where people really were the parents of their parents, and it took them some time to be different. So you had a chance to listen to the last podcast. So we'll start with, like, what was your sort of general overall opinion of what you heard in the arguments about re-election? And then after that, I'm gonna pose basically the same questions and kind of see, well, what direction you would take.
Okay, well, yes, I did have an opportunity to listen to the first podcast. And what I heard was a lot of emotion, a lot of predetermined ideals, and a lot of box-based talking points, to be quite honest, with very little factual basis behind them. Um, and so I really heard the panel, some of which was articulated quite clearly. I didn't agree with it, but I could follow the reasoning behind it, and I can respect that. I can respect a reasoned argument, even though I believe it to be flawed. But to be quite honest, most of it I just thought was just kind of again, propaganda that's been put forth over the past, almost 4 years now regarding the current president. Again, none of which have any factual basis when you actually look at the data as to what's occurred during his time in office.
And the interesting thing is that the podcast was recorded before all the current things that are happening now with this sort of uptick in the virus situation and so forth. So this was information before those events, and so sort of basing the sort of response to that is sort of based on that. But I mean, I will afford them the opportunity if they desire to respond to the response. And I think it was interesting because I did enjoy the conversation for the fact that I wanted to hear honest opinions, and I
Yes.
didn't interject for anything, because whether I agreed or disagreed, I wanted to hear it, because the thing about it is you have to understand the mindset of your sort of fellow country person to understand kind of where they are. So maybe you can, if you choose to build a bridge, you can. So I'm going to give you some of the questions here, and then just kind of get your responses. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'd like to say to that point, I agree with you completely. I think that the opinions put forth were put forth with sincerity. I don't doubt that. I think that they were sincere. I just don't think that they had any support. And maybe that's, from my background as being an attorney, that anytime you have an opinion, it typically needs to be supported by some type of factual analysis. And I think that's what's missing there. But yes, I agree completely. The arguments put forth were definitely sincere.
And the thing about it is that we understand. I've and over the last few years, I've thought this for a while, that elections are basically high school popularity contests. I was never a fan of them when I was in high school, and I thought as an adult, being a part of the electorate, that it would be different, but it's not. And in my opinion, it's not, because money is in politics, and if you have the biggest wallet and you have the right director, messenger, producer, if you can make your campaign film the best, you win, regardless if you're qualified. And that's not to talk about anyone. I'm just saying that's in general. I mean, people could probably attribute that to the election of Obama. They could contribute that to the election of Clinton. They could attribute that to the loss that George Bush took to Bill Clinton, which I think, based on just incumbent privilege, was kind of sad that he lost. Not because he should have been president, but because he was playing with house money and still lost, And so for that, I'll go to the question. So the first one was, and these are not necessarily in order, so but they are what I asked them. So the first thing was, how did they feel, or how would you feel? So you can answer how you felt and then kind of analyze what you heard as well. But how did you feel when the 2016 results came in? Because I said, well, I thought Trump would win. And so for you, how did you feel when the 2016 election results came in?
I was surprised but not shocked. I was surprised, but I wasn't shocked. I didn't quite think the country would elect a man like Trump, so that was surprising to me. But I wasn't shocked in that, given kind of the historical context of, as you said, the way elections are conducted there, along with some of the narratives that have been put forth during the course of the election. And just to be quite frank with you, the terrible campaign that Clinton ran, it wasn't shocking. It wasn't shocking. Surprising but not shocking. I was disappointed for my fellow countrymen. I really was, because I kind of had an idea, having lived in New York for a certain length of time during the Bloomberg mayoral years, I might add, and being familiar with Trump from Page Six and varying news outlets and stories about him. I kind of had an idea what was coming, and all of that has been borne out and come to fruition.
And it's interesting. So this is a question that I asked them later, but it'll be connected to the question I'm gonna ask. Is sort of as something you said. You said a man like Trump, and
Mhm.
so kind of what do you mean by that? And then maybe expand on it of what you thought Make America Great Again was, because I think your sort of analysis of man like Trump is connected to what MAGA meant.
Yeah, but before we even go MAGA, I'll address that in a minute here. But before we even go MAGA, I mean, you're talking about a man who's filed bankruptcy 5 times, who is a known swindler as far as not paying his subordinates and not paying contractors, who's a serial philanderer, has cheated on numerous wives, has, you know, 5 kids by 3 different women. And while that in of itself is not a bad thing or something that should make you a pariah, it's definitely when looked at in this Christian context and the people that support him is hypocritical at best. Along with that, you've got a guy that just is a perpetual, habitual liar that can't tell the truth. I don't think he's able to discern truth from non-truth. So that's what I mean by a man like Trump, just a narcissist. And I think while I'm not a scientist and he hasn't been officially diagnosed, I think any scientist and psychologist that's studied him over time will come to the conclusion that he's a narcissist. So this is what I mean by a man like Trump. He's just not a good person. I mean, no matter how you try to spin, he's just not a good person. I think the panel that you had that supports him even admitted, yes, he's vulgar. Yes, he's crass. Yes, he has no couth. And these are some of the qualities is why they like him, which is astounding to me. But again, that goes back to my original point as to what a certain segment of America has become and why I wasn't shocked. Now to the MAGA point. I mean, Make America Great Again obviously fits on a hat. It's a slogan. It goes with his ability to market. And I will give him credit for that. He is a master marketer. That I will give him credit for. He knows how to message. But it's obvious to anyone who's been on the opposite end of that slogan that it's meant to exclude, not to include. Make America Great Again, just the very word again denotes something from the past or something that needs to reoccur from the past. So what do you mean? Was America great in the 50s during segregation, in the 60s before the Civil Rights Movement? When was America great again? And so in a nutshell, that's what I mean by a man like Trump.
All right, and the thing is, you brought up a point, and the guys did say that they weren't necessarily worried about sort of his bedside manner, and that for some people that's fine, some people that's not. So the thing that I saw a lot of people say, and this is not necessarily a question that I asked them, but I can ask now because it's sort of like in the funnel now, is what's really the difference between running a business and running a country? Like, is it necessary to have compassion and couth and things like that? Because I mean, if we look at the black and white of what Donald Trump has under his resume, whether he's responsible or for it or not, is there's a kind of an economy with a low unemployment rate, and there have been things done to deal with some of the problems that exist. So do people really want a CEO to run a country, or do you want like sort of a statesman to run a country? It's kind of my question, I guess.
Well, I think, we're taping this right in the midst of the coronavirus, right? We're not even at its height or its peak. And I think this situation is a perfect illustration of why a businessman is not the ideal person to run a country. They're two completely separate types of entities. And again, that goes back to messaging. So many outlets on the right have messaged that, oh, we need a businessman to run the country. The country's not a business. It's not. I mean, just first in the size and scope, it's multi times larger than a business. Secondly, you have things within a things within a government structure that are socialized. Medicare, public health, public safety, things like this that are part of the social safety net, which are socialized, that can't be treated like a business, okay? Because you have the welfare of the populace that you have to look out for. You can't just, dismiss or cut randomly because of the trickle effects. So there's isolated things within the structure of government that do not lend themselves to being run like a business. He and again Trump has eliminated the pandemic team that was put in place after and during Ebola. With the minds of, well, they haven't been called into action in X amount of years, so we don't need them. That's what government is for, to plan for contingencies. Okay, like when you're running a business, you might plan for a contingency, which is an economic downturn. Yes, but you have different supply chains or different vendors or what have you, that are possibly you cultivated other markets to make up for that revenue, or that will give you the ability to sustain yourself during hard times. You can't do that with a country, right? You can't do that with a country. You can't develop alternative, alternative resource streams. They are what they are, revenue streams rather. You can't develop alternative um, medical initiatives. The science is what it is. Okay, you can't develop an alternative way to combat a pandemic virus. It is what it is. The proven methods work. There is no new way to fight a pandemic virus. And what we've seen thus far is someone who has said, okay, well, just essentially ignore it, it'll go away. Again, going back to a business background, market forces will change. Well, yeah, market forces will change, it will spread and it'll get worse. And it'll really begin to affect the economy. And I think the last thing I'll say on this is going back to the business mind. And that was the initial problem. The response was looked at economically as an economic crisis, and an attempt to mitigate that through propaganda, through everything is fine, as opposed to approaching it as it was a health crisis. Okay, you have to stem the health crisis, and then in turn the economy will recover, not the opposite way around.
All right. And so, with that, the next question, or one of the other questions I asked them, is before Donald Trump was the nominee, who did they think would the nominee be for the 16 election? Because when he entered the field, it was like 1,000 people, and I would dare to say few saw him as the guy. I'll be honest, I didn't see him as the guy, but once he was the guy, I guess I followed the sort of the bouncing ball thing, and everyone
Mm-hmm.
talked about him, even his opponents. He was the only one on their mouths. This election is very similar, but we're just talking about the 16. So who did you think the
Mm-hmm.
nominee was going to be?
Well, initially, in surveying the field, I thought it would be Kasich. To go through the field quickly, I didn't think it would be Rubio. I just don't think he don't think he has the gravitas, and I thought he's an empty vessel, and I thought that eventually that would show through. People were tired of Bushes, and that was my reluctance to the Democrats putting up Clinton. I mean, that was one thing that was clear following the end of Obama's term, was no more Bushes, no more Clinton. The country was tired of that, and felt as though collectively that they didn't want to head toward what we would consider to be a political monarchy. So I didn't see Bush. Ted Cruz, again, I thought that he was generating a lot of interest on that side, but not a likable guy. And at the end of the day, for the most part, people have to have a connection with the candidate, which is one thing that Trump had. Now, going back to my original point, I thought it was Cage's because he's relatively moderate. He represents that, if you want to call it, a Rockefeller wing of the party. And up until that point, I didn't think that the party had completely been captured by Trump. And if you remember correctly, during I can't remember which debate it was, but we'll call it the Megyn Kelly debate, for lack of a better term. and the way he attacked her, Trump that is, and how Roger Ailes and Fox initially rallied to her and kind of pushed back on Trump. And then Trump, through his Twitter feed and social media, was able to beat back Fox. And Ailes caved and acquiesced and capitulated, and basically left Kelly out there to dry. She eventually left and went to NBC. But that's when I knew, okay, it'll be Trump, because if anyone can make Fox capitulate, then they've basically won the game, because Fox controls the message on that side, and they'll be able to rally um, or feed people what they want to hear that would support that underlying candidate. So that's when I knew, was when he was able to force Fox to capitulate and basically abandon Megyn Kelly.
And that's interesting, because there was a point, while it wasn't a question, that it was brought up about like fake news and things like that. Now, I will say this, because I will be critical of the news, is that Bill Maher said it, a lot of Republicans don't like him, liberals sometimes don't like him, but he's made a point several times that when the news stopped being a loss leader is when the news started to create fake news, which is true. Like, once you had to turn a profit with news, and it wasn't just an information source for the networks that existed, that's when it had to become a show. It had to become media. And so
I agree with that.
Donald Trump's assessment of the media, I think, is mostly accurate, of calling it fake news, because they do choose negative things about him, because he has done some positive things in his time as president. But many times the responsibility of a reporter, a news station, etc., is to give the information and then let the listener sort of digest and choose whatever it is. So that was mentioned there. And so what do you think about his sort of opinion of using that? Because now I think he's using it sort of a way to pull the strings of the media now, and it's become where he owns the media more so than the media is a separate entity, so to speak.
Well, I'm going to push back on that a little bit, in that he labels anything fake news that he doesn't like or that he disagrees with, or is that is factually accurate, that doesn't support one of his positions or one of his lies. Anything that is flattering to him is not considered fake news, regardless of whether it would be published through what we call an irreputable outlet. So I'm going to push back on the term in of itself. Now, where I'll agree with you is that, yes, once the media traditional media will say, had to turn a profit and compete with some other non-mainstream outlets, then yes, it became a loss leader. But this doesn't underscore support the fact that there's still journalists out there supporting facts. Now, you might not like how they're being delivered, or you might not like the vehicle through which they're being delivered, but nonetheless, they are facts, right? And old Senator Moynihan has the famous saying, "You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts." So this whole idea of fake news is an effort to present counterfactual arguments and to present a counterfactual reality. We remember early on in the administration in 2017, Kellyanne Conway saying, "We have alternative facts." There are no such things. 1 + 1 = 2. It's indisputable. That's a fact. Okay. So I think fake news as a term of art was brilliant. I would never doubt that again. Like I freely admit, he's a master marketer, but I will push back on the idea that somehow he's completely co-opted the media. Now, he's co-opted a certain segment of the media, in that, yes, they see him as a vehicle to turn profit. They see him as a vehicle to raise advertising dollars. And this he understood from being in TV. He understood that. And so that he played them very, very well, and at times continues to play them. However, I think that there are we will call them nonprofit journalism outlets. ProPublica is one. NPR is one. I could go down the list. Democracy Now. There's a few others, some of which even lean right, that basically just say, hey, these are the facts, these are the numbers, these are the statistics, this is the data. Okay. And anytime he is faced with something that's reported by one of those outlets and then picked up by quote unquote mainstream media, it's fake news.
And it's interesting, especially for the messaging, because that still exists now. And so I asked the questions, which were interesting questions. The first question I asked him, and it's about this 2020 election. And the first question is, what would be two reasons or a few reasons to re-elect Donald Trump? And I think those are valid questions because, I mean, again, I just talk about incumbent privilege is 90+%. So it takes something pretty serious for an incumbent to be removed. So in your opinion, if you had to re-elect Donald Trump, what would be two reasons that you think, and then just based on what the re-election side said, what is your take on that?
I couldn't give you two. I could only give you one, to be quite honest. And the only one I could give you would be the economy. And we've seen how his response to the coronavirus has been and how that's affected the markets. Now, how it will affect the broad economy is yet to be seen because we're just in the first permutations of what is a legitimate response after a month to 6 weeks of dilly-dallying. And so with the shutdown of airlines, commerce, quarantine of large segments of society, we'll see how that affects the economy. And to his own making, not the virus that is, but the response to his own making, it's almost as though he's signed a suicide pact with himself because the effects of what's being implemented now will hit critical mass around October, November, right around election time. Okay. So even if you are one of his staunchest supporters, you will really start to feel the crush around the time it is for you to go your polling place. But to answer your question, the only valid reason I could give to re-elect him would have been the economy. And again, we'll see how that played itself out over the course of the next 7 months.
Yeah, and I think that was a point that a lot of people made. And even though scientists say that presidents, the result of a president's effect on the economy isn't seen until several years after they've left.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously this economy now, I would say, is pretty close to being Donald Trump's economy. So I think the economy is a valid reason. So obviously the next question is two reasons to elect a new president, or if you have more. But what would be your take on that?
Well, the first thing would be, I'll address the economy last with this, but the first thing would just be common decency, just to have a good person in office. I mean, I don't have children, you don't have children, but many of your listeners do. And many of your listeners, all of your listeners are someone's child. And one thing that's universal, despite what religion, what creed, what color, what language, what nationality is, kids are raised to be decent. Parents want their kids to be good people. And the leader and the holder of the highest office in the land is not a good person. So common decency would be the first and primary reason. Secondly would be just competence, someone who can do the job. I mean, he's illustrated time and time again, he can't do the job despite what propaganda outlets and despite what spin is put on there. Again, when you look at data and numbers, he's not up to the task. This response to the virus and the pandemic is illustration about number 900 of that. So that would be the second reason, just basic competence. The third reason would be someone who's just truthful. And that goes kind of back to the decency. But again, there are decent people who who haven't throughout history been the most truthful. I can think of a few, but just someone who's going to be truthful and straight up and tell the country honest facts, okay? Not honest opinion, not spin, because there's a difference between honest opinion and honest facts. You can honestly have an opinion that's not based in facts. Okay, we see that all the time from some of the arguments that are put forth in support of him. But again, going back to facts, there's only one set of facts, and he routinely lies about those facts. Okay, that's infuriating to me. That's infuriating. And lastly would be the economy. Lastly would be the economy. And we'll see again what happens from the fallout of what the country's experiencing now. But a recession is coming. It's not going to be if, it's a when. I mean, that's you can bank that. A recession is coming. And to have him, guide the country through a recession, I can't even imagine what that would look like. It would turn into some type of, 1920s doomsday situation. I mean, he's already bullied the Fed into cutting rates 50 basis points. He's already implemented the tax cut. He's trying to isolate and restrict global trade. The economic professionals have no more tools in the toolbox to fight against a recession. They just don't. So when it hits, it's just going to be like, oh, well, just like most times under Republican administration, not this bad, but it's going to be, okay, we created the economy and a Democrat comes in and fixes the economy. And then because we have the superior messaging machine, we message again about how, there's all this spending and, no fiscal responsibility, and the American public buys it and elects another Republican, they tank the economy again. It's a cycle. And I would point to the Senate Joint Commission on Finance for that data, Wall Street Journal for that data, Washington Post for that data, ProPublica for that data. You can find it anywhere. I'm sure you're aware of it. Historically, since Truman, the economy has done better under Democrats than Republicans. That's just, again, a fact.
Okay. And so you made a mention of something, and I think it definitely for just clarification, you said not a good person. So based on what metric would you say not a good person?
Well, not a good person in that someone who, again, has repeatedly cheated on their wife, someone who has been accused credibly by 22 plus women of sexual assault, someone who was caught on open mic admitting to sexual assault, someone who has repeatedly taken the side, if not supported, white supremacists. See Charlottesville, good people on both sides. It's never not once been argued that Nazis and supporters of Nazism are good people. Someone who has repeatedly shown their disdain for immigrants with the Muslim ban, and someone who has shown a disdain for people that have the the right to vote and full citizenship, like the citizens of Puerto Rico, and how he handled that fiasco. Someone who's a misogynist and called women, nasty individuals, and again, going back to Megyn Kelly, blood shooting out of her eyes and whatever else. The list goes on. But someone who's, I think he's exhibited through the last 3 years, and again, having lived in New York and seeing some of this behavior chronicled, it wasn't a surprise. I mean, it wasn't a shock, rather, but he's not a good person. I mean, you can, one antidote that I always put forth out there, and I challenge anyone to tell me anything different or present something different, okay? How many, two antidotes. One, how many true friends does Trump have? Trump has people that he calls friends. He has supporters, but all his relationships appear to be transactional. Aside maybe from Roger Stone, I'll give you that. I think maybe Roger Stone and him have some type of true friendship. But other than that, all his relationships seem to be transactional. The second part to that is, and this is going back to not a good person, but I think he's an extremely insecure and unhappy person, just by his, that's exhibited by his actions, his constant need for um, adulation and his constant need to be loved. But how often, if ever, have you ever seen Trump laugh? Ever? And
Ah,
three,
at rallies maybe.
is it a laugh, or is it more of a slight chuckle, again playing to the crowd in an attempt to um, promote adulation and cheers?
Huh?
Right?
Yeah.
That's part of performance. I mean, truly, how often heard, have you seen a clip outside of a performance setting? Because he's an actor, outside of a performance setting where he's being himself, where he is laughed. And if you can find one, great, you can present it to me, but that's just a challenge.
Okay, that's fair. No, that's pretty fair. Another thing that, and you brought up a point, and I know I've seen people kind of get on people on the left from this because the economy is good, and people say, well, it's un-American to wish for a recession. But if you understand economics, uh, economies work in cycles like this, and we have been sort of bullish for a long time, and so
12 years.
for the balance of it, it a recession, while no one necessarily wants a recession, a correction is normally necessary. And so how would you respond to someone if they said, well, wishing for a recession is either anti-American or you're hoping for failure? Because I mean, I don't think anyone who says that is really doing that, but it's also sort of being aware of the writing is on the wall. Throughout thousands of years of history, recessions come after long bull markets. So how would you kind of respond to that?
Well, at the verge of sounding very condescending, I would say go back and take an Econ 101 class. You just articulated why a recession is inevitable. They're cyclical. They're inevitable. Economies run cyclically. They have prosperous periods and then they draw back. They have prosperous periods and they draw back. We've been in a we've been in a prosperous period for 12 years. When I say we, I'm talking about America, for 12 plus years. It's coming. It's coming. Now that can be spurred by a variety of different factors, but inevitably recessions come. It's how economies work. So again, I would tell someone who espouse that, just go back and take an Econ 101 class. That's just, there's not really even anything to argue as far as, patriotism and all that. That has nothing to do with it. Republican economists will tell you that a recession's coming. It has nothing to do with any type of party affiliation or how you feel about the current administration or your love of country. It's just, again, going back to facts, right? Again, going back to these counterfactuals. People want to present, these arguments to support their points that have no basis in facts. A recession's coming. It is.
And so you another point I kind of wanted to talk about, and it's going to segue to another question is, so did the Democrat field? There was an issue obviously with Joe Biden. I asked them a question about nepotism, and so there's the issue about Joe Biden's son. So if we're looking at it and people say, well, okay, Trump is dirty, they own that, he's an imperfect person. But then you look at the other side. Now, when I talked to them, the field was still full, but now it's basically Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and the
Gabbard,
woman who's
Gabbard,
that? Yeah,
Gabbard, Tulsi Gabbard.
and the lady from Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard. And so because it's just those three left, you can say, well, those people are flawed characters. So why would it be worth the time to vote for those people? But for instance, Bernie Sanders has plans that people generally look at and say, well, they're pie in the sky. And then the indictment of Joe Biden is he can't put together sentences. And that's, just that those are actually real things, which they do have sort of resonance. So how would you respond to sort of that about the opponents that he would face?
Okay. Without, because that's a whole different podcast, without going into Bernie versus Biden, because we'll discount Gabbard just because of her numbers and her support. She's pretty much inconsequential for the purpose of this discussion. But without going into Biden versus Bernie, without going into that and speaking more generally of just the Democrat nominee. Okay. A couple of things that I'll push back on with you. Biden can't put together sentences. Has anyone listened to Trump lately?
I'm just telling you what the critique is, man. I'm just telling you what the critique is.
he's about as incoherent can be, right? So again, this is part of where I give him and his cohort credit. Their messaging, the bar has been lowered to such a point where, oh, that's just the way he speaks. That's just the way he speaks. You know, we can't talk about his mental decline or his inability to put together a sentence because the bar's been lowered to such a point where it's just considered that that's just the way he speaks. He's not very articulate, etc. And again, I will challenge listeners of this to go do this. And this is a very interesting exercise. Go back. There's Charlie Rose. There's Oprah. There's several. Go back and pull a Trump interview from, let's say, 96, 97, and listen to Trump then and listen to Trump now and tell me that there hasn't been any type of decline. Challenge you to do that. Okay. He's definitely in cognitive decline. So that would be one of the things that I would push back on in relation to Biden and his cognitive decline is, you know, Trump is just as bad, if not worse. Secondly, I think that just the team that the Democrat is going to put forth, again, going back to my competency argument, will be night and day over who Trump has. Trump, I mean, I don't even know the number. I can't. I don't have the data here in front of me. But how many cabinet officers and White House staff has he gone through in 3 years? Retention is part of stability, which is part of having a coherent structure to running government. Doesn't exist under Trump. Okay. I know for a fact he's on his 4th chief of staff. He's on his 3rd national security advisor. Again, I can go on down the list, don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's the highest turnover by far of any administration in history. The guy can't keep competent people because after someone's been there for a while, they either A, like, oh my God, I can't work in this chaos, or B, because they don't express the necessary fealty to him, he eliminates them. You can't run a country that way, let alone a business. Any Fortune 500 business that was being run the way Trump runs his business, he would have been removed by the board, you know, eons ago. Now people will counter that and say, but he's a great businessman. Again, 5 bankruptcies, and we still haven't seen his taxes, so we still really don't know the numbers behind his true wealth. And it's a private company. It's a private company, so he has the ability to run it however he wants to run it. So that would be the second point I would push back again, along with the first being the cognitive decline, is just, you know, having a qualified team, you know, how this is the cycle, okay? Create drama, put in some kind of faux solution to drama, and then cheer and put forth that you solved some great problem. When A, you created the problem yourself, and B, the solution that you came up to solve said created problem didn't work. See North Korea. Okay, so we're, you know, provoke a fight with Kim. Kim says, okay, maybe we'll go into some type of nuclear war, nuclear standoff. Okay, assume this posture where you go meet Kim, be the first president to go to North Korea. Oh, he loves me, I love him. We send love letters, you know, 3 failed summits and 3 nuclear tests later, nothing's happened. And I can, again, go down the list. The wall. Oh, we're going to build this big, beautiful wall. Okay. Going to get Mexico to pay for it. Mexico hasn't put forth 1 peso to pay for the wall. We've seen, quote unquote, construction of the wall, but that's just repairs of existing wall. We haven't seen actually any new structure being built. Okay. Not to mention, you know, something, a little thing called, eminent domain. In order to get the land to obtain to build this wall, you're going to have to seize it by eminent domain. Are you going to tell me that you're going to go to the border of South Texas, of all places, and tell those people you're going to take their land and put a wall on it? Good luck with that. Good luck with that. And red-leaning, gun-toting, libertarian Texas, you're going to tell me you're going to seize our land and build a wall. This is why it hasn't happened. And again, those are just 2 of the predominant policies, North Korea and the wall, that have failed because of what I said. Create problem, put forth solution to problem, promulgate that you solve problem, and really there was never a problem to begin with.
And so another point was about kind of talking a little bit about impeachment was the investigation. So there was a curiosity or an investigation, however you want to frame it, of what Joe Biden's son had done and Joe Biden's role in that. And then the question of why has Obama been so quiet about it because of that. Now, I am of the stance if there was an illegal activity done, which I'm not saying there is or there isn't, but if there was an illegal act done by Joe Biden or in some case, then he should be prosecuted in the same way. Now, I think the question that people are missing the legality of it was the president of the United States allowed to do that based on the fact that he knew Joe Biden was the likely nominee to run against him. So it can be construed as a politically motivated action. And so then you can get where there's a thought of where you're doing it to help yourself politically. So what's your opinion of the investigation, the impeachment, and Obama's quietness about the whole Biden situation?
Well, okay, we'll take the last thing first. Obama is quiet because that historically has been the posture of every U.S. president after leaving office. That's just out of respect for your the person that came after you. The predecessor is usually quiet. Bush has been quiet. Clinton before that was quiet. Bush won after Clinton was quiet. So that's the underlying reason for Obama being quiet. Okay, it's just historical precedent, something again that has been lost in this. Secondly, Trump controlled Congress for 2 years, controlled both branches of Congress in the White House for 2 years, and this whole Burisma investigation never came up. No mention of it. Wasn't until we got into the election cycle, that all of a sudden, okay, let's do this investigation. Now, to dovetail and to go a little into the weeds, Burisma, a Ukrainian company, his son sat on the board. His son probably not qualified to sit on the board of, making $50,000 a month. Okay, fine, I'll give you that. But, Biden was tasked with getting rid of or putting pressure on the Ukrainians to get rid of I forget the name of it's what would be akin to the Attorney General of Ukraine. I forget the particular name that they call that individual there. But getting rid of that person because that person was corrupt. And it wasn't just an Obama initiative, it was a European initiative. Okay? It was a European Union initiative. wasn't just Obama. I mean, the English have come out, the French, the Italian, everyone's come out and said, okay, this guy had to go. And Biden was tasked with exerting pressure to do that. Now, again, let's go back to just common sense. Okay, so if the guy who's not investigating, meaning the Ukrainian prosecutor who's not investigating Burisma because he allegedly took payoffs from Burisma, is being forced to resign and be replaced with a guy who is going to investigate Burisma, where Biden's son sits, how does that benefit Biden's son? I mean, again, it just doesn't make any sense. So if a guy who was taking the payoffs for the company of which my son sat is being forced to be removed and be replaced by a guy who's actually going to do investigating, how is that going to eventually benefit my son? So that's that. Now let's table that and let's pivot to Trump and his kids. Okay. Jared and Ivanka, I think what was it? It was 141 million over the course of the 3 years they've made through various endeavors and initiatives. You can go back and research.
About that,
there's a great New Yorker article about the trouble Jared was in with 666 Park, which is a property he owned, and how underwater and in debt it was, and how he was struggling before the Trump assumed the presidency to find some way to refinance that building, and was going to have to go into default. And now, somehow miraculously, he's been able to cover his loan on that building and go on and participate in other business deals. Okay. Again, we won't talk about his dealings with MBS, and let's not even think about talking about his inability to get the top level security clearance because of threats of extortion and blackmail. I mean, that's something that the NSC wouldn't give. I mean, Trump lobbied and says, okay, give him the security clearance. They said, we'll give him everything but this. He can't get the top level security clearance. And he's a son-in-law. And Ivanka has 2 security clearances lower than that. Okay, that's before we even get to Eric and Don Jr. We'll just leave them alone because they don't particularly work in the White House. So this idea somehow that, the Trump kids aren't benefiting is just, it's laughable at best. And how, Joe Biden and his son are so corrupt. Again, it's ignoring, I go back to the premise of this conversation to begin with. It's ignoring basic facts to serve the purpose of your opinion, not your argument, but your opinion, which again, for the most part, largely aren't rooted in any kind of factual basis.
So impeachment, because impeachment specifically, the point that we did address was the abuse of power. And the consensus generally was either the president didn't abuse power, or the president was using his power in the correct manner, and the interpretation by the Congress, which was politically motivated, was incorrect. So on the impeachment point, what would be your take on that?
Okay, well, I would say this. Historically, yes, presidents do have the power to negotiate and exert pressure on a foreign, an ally, if you will, to extract something in exchange for something. That's not unusual. That's just called diplomacy. Okay. All right, Saudi Arabia, we want you to, act better and initiate some initiatives towards, female equality, women's equality, and in turn, we'll do this. Okay. That in and of itself is just basic diplomacy. Now, where this goes a little awry or a little astray is those types of diplomatic maneuvers aren't to the benefit of an individual. They're to the benefit of a country or a policy writ large. Okay, the country being America, the policy being American national interest. Where this goes writ large and where their argument fails is what Trump was doing was for the sole benefit of Trump. Wasn't American interest, right? Do this for me. I'll release the aid if you do this for me, which is investigate my opponent. How does that serve the greater American interest? That only serves Trump's interest, right? Only serves Trump's interest. Doesn't serve the greater American interest. Now, if you want to, through proxy or through extension, say, well, what's in Trump's interest is in the greater American interest, then I'm lost. You know, and I'm not sure that will be the pushback to that argument, but then I'm lost, because then you got a monarchy. Then you're saying, well, what's in the king? The king is the state. Then you're saying Trump is the state. So what's in his interest is in American interest. So you lose me with that. And then there's really not much further we can go. So that's the difference with the impeachment. Is one general line of diplomacy is lobbying or trying to negotiate for something that's in the benefit of American interest, and the other is trying to put forth diplomacy or negotiate for something that's in an individual interest.
All right. And so I have about 2 or 3 more questions. One point that there was a general consensus, which I said myself that I thought Trump was, well, basically not brave, but the fact that he said it was pretty interesting, was term limits. Anyone who knows me knows that's my soapbox. I stand on it and I stomp on it a lot, that I think term limits are necessary. And most of the panelists in that specific re-election podcast agree. They think that term limits are necessary because draining the swamp, as it's been phrased, is important. And so my idea was like 20 years maximum. If the military can serve 20 years, then a government official that's in an elected office should serve no more than 20 years. And there have been arguments of like it's unconstitutional. Well, if that's unconstitutional, the president can't be term limited either. So that case is sort of empty to me. And it's also saying term limit for specific office. So in your opinion, they basically agreed with term limits. So what would be your take on term limits?
Broadly construction, I'm for term limits. A to the whoever said it's unconstitutional, that's not true. It's not unconstitutional. There's term limits on the presidency, 8 years. So where it's unconstitutional argument comes from, again, no basis in fact. Many states, again, there's difference between the federal constitution and state's constitution, but many states have term limits. I'm not opposed to term limits. I think they're a good idea, especially in the judiciary. I don't see the reason at this point, for lifetime appointments in the judiciary. So the general concept I'm for, but I would again goes back to some of the things we discussed before. Show me the policy proposal Trump's put forth to effectuate this. Again, it's just all talk on his part. You know, all talk. I mean, so many things that he said are just talking points with no policy initiatives behind them. He's not putting forth any movement to bring forth term limits. At least I'm not aware of one. Can you cite one? Because there isn't one. It's just something that's been said. But yeah, overall, I'm in agreement with or in support of term limits. But again, I want to repeat, as a lawyer and someone who's taught constitutional law, there's no basis in the Constitution for it being unconstitutional. That's just what I want.
And so the interesting part is you kind of talked about messaging. So this is kind of like a two-pronged question here. And in my opinion, because they've talked about messaging a little bit, but I think this is a worthy point to specifically talk about, is, in my opinion, messaging for Democrats and Republicans as political parties it's easier for Republicans because Republicans are the quote unquote conservatives. And I think messaging, in my opinion, is easier on the conservative side because they have a foundation of familiarity. Whereas on the liberal Democratic side, it's about disrupting that familiarity. So you have to find a specific issue to stand on from the liberal side to get people to join in. And so with that, what's your sort of opinion of messaging? Because I think there was a point made that Donald Trump is in line to be the best modern day president. And so that's something that will be in messaging. So how would you address the messaging point being easier for conservatives and the evaluation that Donald Trump is one of the best in the modern era?
Okay, I will agree with you that messaging is easier for conservatives, but I'll disagree with your premise as to why. It has nothing to do with insurgency or disruption on the other side. It has nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with it as far as what you articulate on the right. It all has to do with basic homogeneity. The Republicans aren't a disparate, diverse party, so therefore they only have to craft a message to pretty much effectuate and reach one or maybe two different types of people or demographics. Now, yeah, you have outliers. I'm not saying you can take this as complete 100% general principle, but about 95%. Okay, the Republican Party isn't disparate, right? It's largely middle-aged and white. Again, like I said, you have outliers, but that's pretty much the makeup and demographic of that party. Okay, so therefore you can craft a message to target that. It's easy. Okay, on the other side, on the other hand, you've got a party which is broad and varied and comprised of, and we can't even count the ways of the variances in the demographic that comprise that party. So therefore, you cannot craft a single message that's going to target everyone and resonate with everyone just because of the variance in the beliefs. You have to form coalitions. You don't have to form coalition on the right. You don't, okay? And people talk about identity politics and this, that, and the third. You don't have to inform identity politics on the right because there's only one identity, white, middle-aged. Again, with a few exceptions, but for the most part, it's 95%, maybe even 90%, I'll give you that, white, middle-aged. That's the identity, okay? So that's the reasoning for the unevenness in the messaging, just because of the basic demographics and who the messages have to target. Now, as far as Trump goes, Trump's been marketing for 40 years. He's good at it, flat out. Give him props on that. Flat out good at selling things. Okay. As a caveat, just to tangent a bit, that's another thing. People think Trump's this master builder. Trump owns maybe one building. He owns Trump Plaza. Everything else are licensing agreements. Okay. He's only built a handful of things in his life. Everything else, he basically has, because his name had some cachet, sold his name and licensed his name for X amount of dollars per year and a percentage of revenue on those buildings. That's why it was easy for the owners in Chicago and the owners in Toronto to take his name off the buildings because he didn't own them. Okay, that's just as an aside. But he is a master marketer. I'll give him that. But within that construct, within that context, he never had to prove any competency. And again, living in New York and seeing this up close and personal, if you talk to any New Yorker, he was never seen as being this master businessman. He was basically seen as being this wannabe from Queens who was never accepted into real money society in New York. That's part of the reason for all the insecurity and all the braggadocious. Look at me, look at me, look at me. I belong, I belong, I belong. Okay. I mean, Bloomberg said it best when, it was asked to him, if you win, there'll be two billionaires on the stage. And he said, well, who's the other one? Right. And why do we think Trump is so reluctant to share his taxes and so protective of his finances. Why? Okay. Why is he so protective of that? Again, because underlying his lack of wealth. But going back to the marketing, I don't think he'll be perceived as being the best president ever, maybe of a certain segment of true believers. But, again, you've heard me say this, Lou, before, history is the great chronicler. And historically speaking, he'll go down if one of the worst, if not the worst president. And that's something we won't know for 20, 30, 40 years or so. But a dollar to a dime, that'll be the case because there's no underlying policy initiatives to support him being a great president. He's gotten a tax cut done, and what else? Okay, judges. But that in and of itself doesn't underline a great presidency. Okay. Show me the New Deal. Show me, some kind of healthcare reform. Show me some type of voting legislation. Show me an immigration package, right? Show me something of true consequence that's going to stand the test of time from a policy initiative that would underline him being called a great president other than Sean Hannity said so. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, go ahead. You finish.
So to finish up this messaging point, yeah, it'll be messaged that way. But again, the coronavirus goes part and parcel to this. The emperor has no clothes, and we can see by his response, and we'll definitely, unfortunately, see by the eventual death rate. And I'm not in any way trying to what's the word I want to look for? Promote a higher death rate or cheer on a higher death rate. I want to make that perfectly clear. Please. I've lost a parent recently, an elderly parent recently. But what I will say is that numbers don't lie. That's what I'm getting at. Numbers don't lie. And when some of the supporters and some of the Trumpists start seeing people they know and people in their communities affected by this virus, unfortunately, some of the elderly passing away, some of those attitudes will change about his underlying effectiveness as a president, and therefore the messaging will change.
And so one question before we close up. So with the 2020 election, that really kind of around the corner, if we're being honest about it, what is your outlook and predicted winner of the election? Because I've said it until I see something different that I think he'll be reelected. But that's just my opinion, the kind of just looking at what I see. And so for you, what do you think your the outlook is for the election?
Well, I won't tip my hand here, but you know the one, because we've had these conversations before, so the one tool that I use to judge.
Right.
And I won't tip my hand, but that tool has tipped dramatically in favor of him not winning recently. Dramatically.
That's interesting.
Dramatically. In response to this crisis, it's dramatically tipped. I just checked it this morning, actually. Up until the response to the coronavirus, I was saying that there was a 65-35 chance of his reelection. Okay. In response to this virus and the rippling effect and fallout, again, which we won't see probably in its full effect until October, because we're in mid-March now, April, May, June, July. Things probably really won't come back online until best case scenario May, worst case scenario July, and then after that you have your ramp up period. So again, you're looking at late September, October-ish before things really begin to come clear as to the impact of this. I just don't see a recovery for him at this point. There are going to be too many people affected independently. Let's just forget about people on the left or anti-Truckers. There are going to be too many independents and too many of his supporters, small business owners, farmers, etc., affected for them not to look at him and be like, what the hell was this? What did we do? Now, his hardcore supporters, the Trumpists, and again, I don't say that in a derogatory sense. That's what they are. They're Trumpists. They'll still be with them, but for the most part, I don't see a recovery from this. So I would put it probably the other way now. I'd probably put it at 60-40 or so against a reelect at this point. Especially to add one more point to this, that the Democrats have come to their senses and decide to go with a centrist and not a democratic socialist. I think that in and of itself, a overall feeling of just return to normalcy, return to even, will vote against Trump. Because that's one thing that Trump and his supporters don't see. They've been able to channel their anger and channel their the posture of he's speaking for us and getting back at the elites and all this. But one thing that they don't realize is just the general chaos and disruption that it's caused in average everyday American life. And I don't mean, again, you take party affiliation out of this, okay? But the average person who's going to work, taking care of their kids, paying bills, does not want to hear about Trump or the president every day. They just don't. It's just like, damn, I can't turn on my radio, I can't turn on my TV without seeing this guy. It's overbearing. So just the desire to just like make it go away, make it stop. Okay, just tone it down a little. Can we go a week without having to hear about the president? And again, that goes back to the narcissism and the ego, where everything has to be about him. He can't go one day without being in the media spotlight. So there's this constant generation of crises, from one to the next, to control the media narrative. So the attention and spotlight will all be on him. It's exhausting. I know plenty of Republican friends of mine who are just exhausted. It's like, damn, enough. I just want to go to work, make my money, and come home and not have to hear about this dude. So I think that's something that's been minimized and discounted as well by that side, is just people just had enough. So I'm putting it at 60-40, maybe a little more. And again, going into the tools that I use to calculate this stuff, which are very, very reliable, they've tilted really strongly in that direction recently, very strong.
Well, I think that'll be interesting, especially whenever the Democrat Party has a nominee. So the podcast is called Voices, and I love to highlight other people because I think I've been blessed in this life to know a lot of quality people from a myriad of arenas. And so the final voice, I always want to be the person who is the guest, because it's about what they have to say. And so the final word is always whatever the guest wants to talk about. So it can be anything. It can be about the politics and the response you just did, or it can be about something that's sort of on your heart. So I will thank you for being here, and I will leave the final word to you.
Okay, thanks, Lou, again for the invite, and I really appreciate the platform. Thanks again. I'll stick on topic, and just personally, I want to express that I am not a hater of Trump. I don't hate anybody. But I'm definitely not a hater of his supporters. I can understand their reasoning for supporting him, and actually I can respect those that have factual support as far as their opinion goes for for the reason that they're behind him. And again, that goes back, I guess, to my legal training and what I do now as a professor. If you can present an argument to me that has some type of factual basis, is rationalized and analyzed with statistical data and support, I'll accept it. Whether I agree with it or not is inconsequential. I'll accept it because you took the time to educate yourself. Education being the pivotal word in that sentence. Educate yourself to formulate this opinion. Okay, got all the respect for you. Okay, where I have a problem with is when you just espouse things that you've heard and you haven't taken the time to, again, educate yourself and see if they're true. And secondly, to piggyback off that, I have an even larger problem with, if you have taken the time to educate yourself, found data that contradicts your opinion, and you disbelieve it just because you don't like what it says, that speaks volumes for, the type of person you are when you know something to be untrue, but yet you believe it or argue for it because it's just what you want to believe and not what's factually correct. So that's what I would say in relation to the conversation we just had is, my positions are not personal in relation to Trump and Trump supporters. They are factual. He has been largely ineffective, okay? He's been largely untruthful, and he's largely indecent. And those are not qualities that I want in any leader. And I'll leave it at that.